Hello again. So where was I? America. So obviously doing a channel like the one that I do, in which I talk a lot about the United States of America, it's very easy, I think, to slip into generalizations of just exactly what America is. Simply referring to America as America could be seen as a generalization. And of course, I deal a lot in sort of the language of America, and occasionally you'll watch videos, even some of mine perhaps in the past, where there might be references to the American accent. Of course, there is no such thing as the American accent. That's the thing about America, it's so big. From the west coast to the east, you're talking 3,000 miles, but then you've got up and down as well. Not to mention Alaska, which is the largest state in the Union, and is, if you include the water territories of Alaska, is some 7 times larger than the entire United Kingdom. And then, of course, you've got Hawaii out in the Pacific as well. And across all of that, not only do you have a vast array of sort of language differences that we've touched on throughout these videos, but of course, the topography, the geographical makeup of the country is broad and sweeping and very different from one end to the other. All that to say that America isn't New York City. That's the idea, perhaps, that people like me back in Britain get when we watch television shows, because that's where all of the energy is. That's where the people are, right? But just earlier this year, I was out in the wilderness of Idaho, where it seemed like there was nothing for miles but mountains, Rocky Mountains. The like of which you could climb and get lost in. It can be dangerous, but it can be fascinating at the same time. America, particularly in its western half, absolutely replete, if you haven't noticed, I like that word, with sort of national parks, national monuments. And it's because it is a natural majesty out there. And then the people, right? The people that make up this country came from far and wide, I included. And so it's difficult to generalize what an American is. And then to talk about history, I think America often gets an undue reputation for not having any history, because it's such a new country. Firstly, the United States of America is pushing 250 years old, all right? She's a senior citizen at this point, let's be honest. But, obviously in terms of European history and world history, that's relatively short. That's a relatively short time, right? But, quite a lot has happened in that time, and it happened to coincide with a time when primary sources were more and more. There were more and more of them, specifically as we move into the 20th century with television. And this is a country that's put a person on the moon. So to sort of denigrate its history in that way is possibly a bit short-sighted. But even before that, its own civil war, its war with us, its war of independence with the British. It sort of boasted numerous stories that came out of that that are worth looking into. And even if you want to generalize America as being a country of a very little history, of course it isn't, because there were people here before the Europeans arrived. Those were the natives, and those natives lived here in tribes for thousands of years. So the history of this country, this land, is far-reaching. As you go around this country, as I've done a little bit in the last year, as I've said, you see markers of that Native American history. There are national monuments dedicated to it. There are museums dedicated to it. There are even, obviously, tribes still in existence today. Again, I think it's important to note that. We don't do enough of noting that. We're very aware, I think, that North America, had a native population and had a native history. We somehow detach ourselves as non-Americans when we think about America's history. And then just quickly to circle back to language. The great thing about this country, much like my own, is it's quite difficult to say that Americans say this word or Americans say that word, when in fact, a lot of words are regionalized to certain places. Like I said in a previous video, I came across the word whistlepig when I was out in Idaho. Whistlepig to mean groundhog. Groundhog being itself an animal we don't really specialize in. Do you specialize in animals? I suppose if you paint them. In the UK, in Britain, the terminology that people use is different. I touched on it before, but depending on the region that you're in, you might say pop, you might say soda, you might say Coke if you're in the South, just to generally mean fizzy drink. That's the beautiful thing about it. Pronunciations vary all around this country. I did a video a while back on the word ornery, right, which is an American English word, and it either means mischievous or quite grumpy and curmudgeonly, right? But there are different ways to pronounce it. You know how Americans, generally speaking, I'm generalizing now, pronounce the R. It's a rhotic way of speaking for the majority of people in this country. But with that very word, with the word ornery, a lot of people drop that R at the beginning, the first R. And I plotted this on a map. I actually did some research to see if this was a regional thing. And it turns out it was. It looks to me as if that change happened during the migration west during the 19th century. And so that's just the amazing thing. The country's so big that, I talk about messages, the ideas that got lost in the pond between Britain and America, different word differences. Same thing happens within America itself. It's so large that one end of the country perhaps doesn't know that this end of the country is using this terminology. And this is something that more and more I'm coming to understand. If I point out an American English word like cattywampus, right? There could be somewhere in the United States that just didn't get that word. And I find that fascinating. I think it's fascinating how language just spreads in general. But when you're talking about a wide area and a wide number of people, you've got to remember there's over 320 million people in the United States, then that's going to happen. And that's why it's difficult to generalize. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.